Alex.
Yes, Tyler.
So, yesterday's Christmas.
It was Christmas.
And today we are rapidly approaching the new year. And as always, we try to come up with a New Year's tradition, or not tradition, a resolution per se of what do we want to do next year? And I kind of messaged you between episodes. I'm like, hey, New Year's resolution for the year, for the podcast, is let's try not to go on 3-month hiatuses again.
Yeah.
Granted, this year was
another weird one.
Both years we've done this, we've had kind of just weird years where, the one year Alex gets married. Okay, understandable. Take a pause for that. Go on the honeymoon, take a pause for that, whatever.
Yeah. We were good about that, though. We planned ahead. We were better that year. This year, we had a couple big chunks that we just kind of forgot we existed.
But
and then
the funny part is,
we need to do the podcast.
As I was doing my housekeeping last week, I did the math, and we pushed out the same amount of episodes both years. So maybe we weren't as bad as we thought we were.
As long as consistent.
Consistency.
I mean, you just need to be even more consistent by staying weekly, not we're going to do a bunch, and then it's like, forget the podcast is a thing for a little while, and then it's like, hey, we need to do that. Let's do this more.
But anyway,
try to be good boys and actually stay on top of things.
That's our podcast. Do you have any New Year's resolutions you'd like to share?
The golden standard of need to get back in shape.
Yeah.
But
I am on that boat too.
That's never ending.
Yeah.
My resolution is to just enjoy time with the little guy. Now that he's here, he's finally home. It was a very good Christmas that we had him. He's downstairs taking a nap right now because he just ate. His mom is an angel. She's fantastic. She's doing great. Spending time with them now that I've got a whole family.
There you
go. It's a good time. Yeah.
Oh, my resolution is to spend more time with my friends and family. I kind of feel like I see everybody once a week for a little group get together, and then I don't talk to anybody really in person for the rest of the week. So I'm gonna try to get better at that. But as always, I am Tyler. That is Alex. We are your hosts today for Life the Complete Story. We are adventuring into amphibians as we have been doing for the past couple weeks. We started with the general overview, and obviously we went into salamanders the past couple weeks. Today we're moving on into frogs.
Yeah, frogs and toads. This one, buckle up for this one. This is the biggest group within the amphibians. Today, we're just going to kind of give the overview of Anura, which I believe is the class, correct? Or no? Is that the order, Anura?
It's the order.
It is an order, yes.
Yeah, the class is Amphibia.
Yeah, that's as soon as I said class, I'm like, no, the class is Amphibia. The order Anura, which is the largest group of the amphibians,
but
covering the frogs and toads. But before we get to that, we have to start.
Nature in the news. Today we are talking about the golden age of species discovery.
Yeah, this is just published a few days ago. This is pretty cool.
300 years ago, a man by the name of Charles Linnaeus,
Linnaeus
went on this massive undertaking. Carl.
A Swedish biologist and physician from the...
Yes. He had this great idea of let's group all the animals and all the plants together and put them in the like groups. And this is where binomial nomenclature came around.
Correct.
Where we describe species by their genus and their species name. So at the time of his taxonomy, there were about 10,000, roughly, species described within that. And we have been undertaking this mission for the past 300 or so years. And now we're kind of compiling our data and realizing that we're finding an average of 16,000 new species every year. Granted, most of these are insects or microbes or fungi, so it's kind of smaller things.
Things that were a lot harder to describe before a lot of modern technology, like genetics especially, is the biggest push to a lot of things that looked very similar. So in the past, taxonomy was primarily based on how things looked in similar habitats. So of course, all the plants were put together, and then the plants were divided into the vascular and non-vascular plants, then flowering, non-flowering, and so on, as we've talked about, or with the fish, your different kinds of fish.
Yeah, it was very anatomical and physiologically based. Now we're getting more into genetic-based taxonomy because we have the tools and the equipment required to go in and do this. Go in and see the genome and see, okay, well, these are different than these ones, and so on. So what these researchers did was they compiled the data, they averaged out the data from 2015 and 2020, and realized that we're finding 16,000 new species a year.
That's now is about what they're finding each year, which is the highest rate of new species identification that's been recorded. So we're finding so many more new species than we have in the past, which is really cool because, and like Tyler said, most of these are like insects, especially or arthropods. Some plants and fungi is the vast majority. About of that 16,000, most of them, about 10,000 animals, which is mostly arthropods and insects, which are insects are arthropods, but just a broad term. But there's also about 2,500 plants and about 2,000 fungi, which is pretty cool. A lot of these typically are found like in tropical regions, like rainforests, where there's areas where you'll find like a couple plants that are like their own species in like 1 square kilometer, and that's the only place they exist in the entire world.
Right, they grow on one tree at this exact latitude and longitude.
Yes.
And another thing that this is so important about is it helps us find endangered or threatened species before they go extinct. And this helps us with conservation for those guys. This also helps us because a lot of organisms are used in like natural medicine. We'll talk about that a little bit later on today with some of these frog species, but they're used in like a natural medicine, whether it's the compounds they produce or what have you. So being able to identify new sources for some of these, like sometimes medicine takes away a vital species because it's so important to the medical field that we basically detriment the entire species. Like horseshoe crabs are kind of like one of them.
Super great.
Yeah, they're not doing great, but they're also not like critically endangered.
Yeah.
But they're so useful for cancer research and stuff like that, where
antibiotics, a lot of things, because their blood is actually copper based, so it's blue, and they use that a lot for like testing medical equipment and solutions of that, because if it's has something to do with if it's like things are contaminated, they're able to use that to tell. I'm not sure on the actual science behind it, but that's where it is used.
Yeah. So to conclude on like I said, this 300 years later, and we found 15% of all of the species we've ever known within just the past 20 years. I think that's really cool. Just a little quick nation news. Nothing too numbers based on it. This is just an evaluation of the past couple years.
Yeah, and it's saying projections suggest that there's just based off of what they found, just in fish species, there could be as many as 115,000 fish species. That total is based on how many we've already described. There's a lot more that we haven't even touched yet, and it gets even crazier when you look at like insects. We know of about 1.1 million insect species. That number could be closer to 6 million, even all the way up to about 20 million. That's individual species. So it's insane how much we haven't actually looked at and discovered.
Right. Well, with that being said, let's move on into our lesson. As we kind of alluded to, we're going to be talking about anurans today. Basically, these guys are frogs and toads, although toads is more of a physical description. There is no difference between a frog and a toad other than its physical characteristics.
Mostly their habitat.
Yeah. So they are a very diverse group of semi-aquatic individuals. They are short-bodied and tailless. So they have like it's called a Euro style. We'll talk about it a little bit later. And that would be like the remnants of what the tail was in a tadpole stage. But the adults themselves do not have a tail unless specifically to that species. Like I said, rougher skinned frogs. There you go. That's a better picture.
Yeah, I really like that picture.
They are the rougher skinned frogs tend to be called toads, but there's no taxonomic distinction because there's frogs and toads within the same suborder or suborders and things like that. So They have a wide distribution ranging from the tropics to the subarctic regions. But there's the greatest concentration within those tropical rainforests and the surrounding wetlands. So, if you think about it, there's a lot of tree frogs and poison dart frogs living in South America, Asia regions like that. But there's still frogs like the wood frog that lives in Alaska and Canada, the one that freezes in the winter.
Yes. Yeah.
The group Anura is one of the 5 most diverse orders of vertebrates. I don't know the other ones. I'm assuming Pocomorphs are up there because we talked forever about them.
Yeah. Just specific orders. Yeah, that's got to be one of them. But did you say the Anurans account for about 88% of all extant amphibians? That means living amphibians that we have described. So of the 3 orders of amphibia we will talk about, these guys cover the vast majority of them.
Yeah, since we've already covered salamanders, by the time we finish talking about frogs, we'll have covered probably about roughly 95 to 97% of all amphibian species. There's not many caecilians. The oldest frog dates back to Proto-Frog from the early Triassic, but molecular dating suggests that the initial divergence branches back to the Permian. So the oldest modern frog, like the Proto-Frog, is Proto-Frog, but there's belief that the initial branching for unknown started back in the Permian, even if they weren't frogs per se. As I said, they have short, stout bodies and they have protruding eyes. In all species, the eyes kind of bulge out a little bit from the eyelid region. Limbs fold under the main torso. They have bendable legs, helps with jumping and things like that. The tongue is anteriorly attached. So what's that, back of
front? Yeah,
yes,
so it's
front.
attached to the front of the mandible, which is the lower jaw, and their tongues are actually protrusible. They use them. So contrary to popular, frogs don't shoot their tongue out the way they are in cartoons, but they can kind of launch their tongue a little bit. So they'll jump and they'll kind of flip that tongue out, and it's very sticky, and that gives them a little more reach to help catch typically, especially smaller frogs that eat a lot of insects and similarly sized things. Some larger ones do eat small fish.
The skin is glandular, so they're able to release a bunch of secretions ranging from distasteful to toxic. That all depends on the species. And not all frogs have distasteful taste. I mean, I'm sure they do to whatever their prey is, but not everything is as dangerous as you'd think it is. Obviously, poison dart frogs are, and we'll get to cane toads and some of the other toads that release secretions as well. Not everything is too terrible. They range in colors. So as you can see in Alex's beautiful picture, up in the top left corner, you have frogs that are more brownish, kind of like dead leaf shaped colors. You have frogs that are mottled green to help blend in with the algae and the scum of ponds. And you have a whole bunch of brightly colored frogs that help warn of their toxin. Was it aposematic?
Yeah, I believe, that's aposematic coloration. It warns that they are, at the very most, at least they don't taste good to their predators, but a lot of times it means that they are toxic. So like Tyler said, the poison dart frogs, the vast majority of them are very brightly colored. Basically a warning to predators, hey, it's more like a big stop sign. Yes, I'm very brightly colored because I'm not trying to blend in. I'm warning you that I am bad. I don't taste good, or I can kill you if you try to eat me.
Right. They have a lot of adaptations to. Most live in fresh water, although some have been adapted to dry land. Even still, others are adapted to burrowing underground and even living up in the trees.
Yeah, like the first picture I showed was the red-eyed tree frog. They live in the rainforest, high in the trees.
They have semi-permeable skin. They're like the salamanders. They're close cousins. They are very susceptible to dehydration. So the ones that do live in those drier environments have adaptations to survive, whether it's collecting dew off the air or things like that.
having kind of like thicker. I don't want to say waxier skin, but their skin is not as permeable. It's a little thicker, so that way they can survive
Yeah,
drier environments longer.
almost like a cuticle of a plant or something like that.
Yeah.
A very vocal species. You hear them all the time if you go to a pond, a lake, whatever. Even in the rainforest, I'm sure they make a lot of vocalizations. Um, and most of that is courtship behavior / warning sign. They lay their eggs in bodies of water. Obviously, most of them do. There's a lot of arboreal species that kind of just find like a vernal pool or
Even
something like that.
like leaves that are cupped and hold water, they will lay their eggs in those like little puddles, pond sort of things. There are some that even will hold them in their mouths, and then there's one species that really grosses me out that actually the eggs get
Suriname
pushed.
toad.
Yeah, the eggs
Gross.
get pushed into the skin, and they look like if you have I forget what the name of that phobia is, but do not look up the Suriname toad.
Yeah.
You can, but you've been warned. It'll make your skin crawl.
They're gross.
It is gross.
And after these eggs then hatch, they are tadpole, which would be the larval stage of most amphibians, and those guys have tails as well as internal gills. And these tadpoles have a range of mouth parts. Most of the time, they are more like kind of like the radula of a snail, where it's more grinding than teeth. And they use that for algae and aquatic vegetation. They then metamorphose into adults that have developed lungs, but they also use gas exchange as well as buccal pumping. Which Alex, you want to describe what buccal pumping is?
The easiest way to describe it is they use like their mouth and throat to actually force air into the lungs rather than the way we do, where you like the chest expands and pulls air in. So it's positive pressure instead of negative pressure. So like the bottom of the mouth kind of lowers and it takes air out of the lungs and draws it in from outside, and then it is kind of forced as the bottom of that is raised again, shrinks back down, kind of forces the air down into the lungs and then some out of the mouth as well. So they use like their mouth and their throat muscles to force the air into the lungs rather than breathing the way we do. It's a little different. And then as well, that especially like some fully aquatic species will allow for some gas exchange through the skin so they can stay underwater longer and they don't have to use their lungs quite as intensively. But as far as I know, all adult frogs do breathe air.
As Alex said, the adults are carnivorous, feeding on insects and smaller invertebrates as well as smaller fish by seizing it with their adhesive tongues and swallowing them whole. They use their eyeballs or other muscles up towards their mouth to kind of shove it down their throat and their stomach. That's the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, and the way like the eyes, especially if they have really large eyes, those eyes will push down into the eye sockets and kind of pushes into the top of their mouth, and all those muscles kind of help force the food down. It's kind of weird to describe without showing you like a video of it. It's they do that, and as well, it's like the muscles of the mouth and throat to push it down.
So since the 1950s, we've seen a general decline within most amphibians, but frogs in particular, with about 1/3 of all members either being threatened or endangered, and over 120 individual species are believed to have gone extinct within the past 35 years. Alex, you want to talk about this leg structure for?
Yeah, I'll pick it up. Some of the physiology of frogs, as you can see, they all have typically very long back legs. It's kind of it depends on their habitat. Some like swimming frogs tend to have longer legs with very webbed toes. More like toads per se tend to have some slightly shorter back but thicker back legs. They kind of as they hop along the ground, and tree frogs tend to have longer front limbs as well as some decently long hind limbs, and they'll actually have large kind of suckers on their fingers and toes to help latch onto the surfaces as they climb. But all frogs will jump. That, like I said, that unique leg structure depends on that habitat. They all have 4 fingers and 5 toes on the front legs. They'll have 4 fingers, and then on the back they tend to have 5 toes. Typically, one of those toes is a smaller, kind of just auxiliary toe on the side, similar to the way our feet are. The vast majority, as I said, are proficient jumpers, and a lot of their musculature and their skeletal structure has adapted to that. As you see, the stout bodies, I believe, if I remember correctly, they're pretty much their whole spine and everything is fused, so they're real stiff, and it allows for some of that shock absorption, as well as kind of a very strong point for the back leg muscles to attach to, so they can jump very far. And the tibia, fibia, and the tarsals, so on the lower part of the leg, they are all fused into one strong bone, along with those elbow bones of the forelimbs to help them absorb the impact from jumping, as well as give it, like I said, that stronger bones to allow them to jump very far. And then those metatarsals, kind of like for your hand, the carpal's like the middle part of the hand. The metatarsals, like those inside of the foot, just below your toes. They tend to be very, very strong, and they actually extend during the jump to allow a longer amount of push-off period. So kind of helps with the friction, a sturdy base to push off of. The tail vertebrae, so all the vertebrae that are past the pelvis, that would be a tail. And animals that have tail, they are all fused together into what is called a urostyle that allows the transfer of that force of jumping from the legs into the body, kind of helps push it all forward. As we said before, a lot of that skeletal structure is adapted specifically for jumping. They have pretty much all the muscles as well are adapted to that jumping. They really don't have a lot that allow them to retract their limbs into the starting position. Most of the muscles are designed to push outwards so they can jump, and then just a couple to pull them back. It doesn't take near as much energy to kind of fold them back up under the legs or under the body. Many of them have web feet, as I talked about before. That webbing does correspond to how much time they spend in the water. So a very aquatic species will have a lot of webbing. More land-based species tend to have pretty minimal webbing, almost non-existent in some. Talked about those arboreal species before that have those like little suction pads on the ends of their toes. They're not suction-y the way you think of like a suction cup. It's more of like some columns of cells that secrete like mucus that allows it to be sticky to those pads, which allows them to climb things like glass because they stick to it. And as well, those arboreal frogs will have structures that increase the surface area of the toes to allow for more of that mucus to contact more space. So the ends of their toes tend to be very wide and flat. We talked about those different types of locomotion, the jumping. Some do more of like a crawling if they're moving slowly. Some can actually burrow. They'll have that webbing on like the front feet or even the back feet. They'll use it to dig. And then they can swim, and there's some that can even glide. Is it something where like they have like flaps of skin?
They're like flying frogs, and they use the webbing of the really webbed toes, and they use that to catch the surface area to wind to air.
Okay.
So they'll use it to glide, kind of like not like a Draco, like the Draco lizard, or like a flying squirrel, but it's in their toe pads versus like a flap between their limbs.
Okay.
I could try to pull up an image real quick.
Okay. Yeah. As you said, a lot of these tend to be predators as well as prey species, so a lot of them will have different types of defense, like the camouflage or the toxins we talked about that are known as bufotoxins. They come from these glands that are called the parotoid glands. There are some others that are really freaky that will actually break their fingers and toes and basically push those broken bones through the skin and kind of use them as like claws. I forget which one that is, but it's wild. Frogs, beyond just their regular purposes within the environment. They have a lot of purposes as like a food source. There you go. There's that kind of some of the gliding frog. You see how very long and flat their toes are, and they have incredibly webbed toes. So when they jump, they'll spread their hands and feet out and use those to kind of glide themselves between tree branches. They're pretty cool. They're pretty neat. But they'll use as a food source, like in America and some other places, like bullfrogs. People will eat frog legs, and apparently they're pretty tasty. I've never had them. I would definitely try them if offered, especially if someone knew what they were doing, as well as other things like research or even pharmaceuticals, like some of those chemicals that they exude from their bodies are actually used for pharmaceuticals. Of course, a lot of folks who've been in school, especially in the United States, they're popular for dissection in biology and anatomy classes, just because some of the frogs, typically they're leopard frogs, I believe is what they're called. They're relatively large, and it's something that's easily raised. And then for these dissections in those classes, Tyler and I have both done that in school
multiple times,
a few times. It's neat just to see kind of how the internal physiology is. You can see similarities as well as differences between that and then higher organisms. Let's see here. So there's a lot of links between the frogs and the nervous system and electricity within the body, as well as researching the heart, because amphibians are where we start seeing distinctly chambered hearts. I think amphibians, are they still 2-chambered or are they 3-chambered? They're 3-chambered hearts?
Chambered.
Okay. That's what I thought. So this is where you start seeing, you get to like the higher, like mammals and birds, you see the 4-chambered hearts, but now we're just seeing more advancement within that internal biology. And some kind of other stranger uses. The African clogged frog was famously used as a pregnancy test in the first half of the 20th century. Do you have a little more on that? Because that seems like you can't just tell them that and then leave it go.
True. So there is a hormone within female, like pregnant females' urine, where whenever you expose the African clawed frog to that hormone, it induces them to lay eggs.
Okay.
So the presence of that hormone within your urine would induce a frog to lay eggs, and that was how they validated the pregnancy.
That's pretty neat. See, within 12 to 24 hours, faster, easier, more humane than previous tests, like on mice and rabbits. It was considered the first widely accessible, reliable pregnancy test until the modern home kit of the 1970s, but it has since declined due to the chytrid fungus killing a lot of these frogs, as many of the frogs that we've talked about. I don't know how, must have been pretty reliable for them to use it for so long. That's pretty cool. I'm sure, like the 1930s to 60s. Huh. Doesn't give an overview of how reliable it was, like false positives or false negatives. But that's pretty neat. The more you know. Frogs are popular subjects in cloning, as well as branches of embryology, because they have fairly short lifespans, and I think that their genomes are a bit simpler to use, and they're in lab settings. They're pretty readily attainable because they lay a lot of eggs at one time, and they're having eggs that don't have a shell. Their eggs, as well as many other amphibians, are just basically, they're just little jelly balls is the easiest way to describe them. You can see like the embryo in the center, and then around it is there's like a glob of jelly. And typically, especially in frogs, they're all stuck together in kind of a mass. So they're easily worked on for those like cloning and genetic research. As we talked about with the pharmaceuticals, those different frog toxins are used for pharmaceuticals specifically. An example would be epibadidine. I'm not sure what that specifically is used for.
Epibadidine it's like morphine.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Just 200 times more potent.
All right.
Yes.
And then there are other chemicals that actually have been looked at to use in the treatment of HIV, which that's pretty cool. They could use some of that to help that a pretty rough disease that has no cure as of now, no definitive cure at least. And then there's others that are like the cane toad or the Colorado River toad that were believed to have been used as a hallucinogen by ancient Mesoamericans because their secretions have psychoactive compounds that are similar to modern recreational drugs. So Let me say, there's a lot to the frogs and toads.
To unpack here.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. This is just our overview. We will get more in depth as over the next few weeks into the different families and kind of what those all entail. But that is the bulk of what we're at least our overview for today. So then, Tyler, if you want to hit us with our amazing species for the day.
Yeah, today's amazing species is going to be the variable Harlequin frog. These guys look gorgeous.
They're pretty cool looking.
Critically endangered. We have no population trend, whether it's increasing or decreasing. However, if you look at the map per se, once Alex shows the picture off a little bit, I'll have him show you the map. But they live throughout a big bulk of Costa Rica as well as Panama. The red region in our map would be where they lived, where they used to live, and the orange region is the current extant range. I'm assuming this has something to do with elevation, where they need to be above a certain elevation.
I'm not sure. It looks like it's a bit mountainous. I know Costa Rica and Panama are relatively mountainous countries, especially Costa Rica. So yeah, that I'm not positive as far as where they would live, but it seems to be more along in the map. You can kind of see what looks like a bit of a mountain range running down through the kind of central Costa Rica to that part of Panama where the largest resident population is.
Yeah. As I said, they're critically endangered, assessed in 2019 and published in 2020. This was a decline from the 1990s and 80s, pretty much due to kite trade, as well as a loss of 80% of their population. An estimated further 80% of the remaining population in a 21-year window was then also estimated to be decreased between 2002 and 2023. There has been recent recording in Panama as well as the two extant subpopulations they've been keeping track of in Costa Rica. My hypothesis of an elevation limit, whatever, was more a peak. They can only survive up to about 2,000 meters, and they tend to live above 16 meters above sea level. Is absent from the Pacific lowlands, so Costa Rica along the Pacific coast. And that Costa Rican population, as we saw on the map, declined significantly, now only being found in 2 areas. Some other more common threats are housing, mining, so resource development through humans, as well as agricultural, as runoff tends to be a big problem with amphibians because they do breathe through their skin occasionally. Pollutants are very harsh to them.
Yeah, because that skin is porous, it's pretty easy for those chemicals to get into their bodies and do some serious damage.
And as well as the chytrid fungus that we've talked about in depth for the past couple weeks.
Yeah. Looks like there's a little bit of use in international pet trade, especially in the 70s, where like thousands of them were collected. But even though it is illegal, there are still some that are found today in those in the illegal pet trade.
We do have some actions in place for conservation. These remaining subpopulations of Costa Rica occur in private reserves and the Zona Protectora Las Tablas, which is a protected zone within Costa Rica, and several of the Panama populations exist within protected areas. Panama has this as a high priority species in its Amphibian Conservation Action Plan, or the PACAP. That's really all I have for these guys. Have you found anything else, Alex?
I know they are looking to do some more conservation, such as habitat protection and management. Anti-poaching efforts, I think, are a big one, as well as external, like outsourcing breeding programs to try to reintroduce captively bred organisms back into their native environment. But it is especially they do have some river areas in Costa Rica that They have found some of these remaining subpopulations that they believe are a decent biological corridor to reintroduce some of these captively bred groups. But fortunately, I know Costa Rica and Panama are both pretty good about their conservation efforts, especially Costa Rica, because Costa Rica is considered at least of a terrestrial, most biologically diverse country in the world. So they're pretty tough on their conservation. They do a lot for it.
So that's all we have for our amazing species of the day. We'll kick it on over to Alex for his most wanted. And
Yes.
This one is
It is a doozy.
one of the most wanted things.
Yes. So today we're talking about the cane toad, which we talked about a little bit today. Scientific name is Rhinella marina, named by Linnaeus back in the 1700s, formerly known as Bufo marinus. So it's the cane toad, giant toad, marine toad, South American cane toad. There's a bunch of different names. They are native to South Central America, Mexico, and the extreme southern part of Texas. They have been introduced in other parts of the U.S. like Florida, as well as throughout the world. I know they're a real big problem in areas like I think Australia has a huge problem with the cane toad. They were initially introduced in the time of the sugarcane crop explosion within the tropical regions to help control the pests, the cane toad, sugarcane. They help control pests in those sugarcane plantations, but they have since been accidentally or intentionally introduced to other areas by importers, zoos, laboratories, things like that. Their impact is they are voracious feeders. They prey on and compete with a lot of native species, as well as being highly toxic to their predators. And this includes pets. Because they are so large, they're not super fast. A lot of predators and pets will try to catch them, and they are very toxic. And this leads to a lot of these predators then dying because they are not used to these invasive species. And
yeah,
there's
images
wipes them out.
There's actually images from Australia of crocodiles, like big saltwater crocodiles, who have eaten a cane toad and have passed from the toxin. So they're pretty potent when it comes to other toxins, being able to take out large crocodiles.
Yes, yeah. As far as I said, those introduced areas, a lot of the Caribbean in the like south of between North and South America, and a lot through the Atlantic, as well as kind of northeastern Australia, and then up through the Philippines and a lot of Oceania into like Hong Kong, kind of that range through there. They do get, as I said, they're pretty large. The males reach the females are typically larger than the males, or at least longer, getting about 10 to 15 centimeters or 4 to 6 inches, maxing out about 24 centimeters or 9.5 inches. So for a lot of, if you've seen a lot of frogs, that is pretty large as far as frogs are concerned. And they live a long time, about 10 to 15 years in the wild, and even longer in captivity, one specimen reaching about 35 years. And the other problem is they're very tolerant to salt concentrations up to about 15% of seawater. So they can live in some of, and that's for the tadpoles. But there are areas that they have found tadpoles and toadlets at salinities of about 27.5%, which in Panama, which is a lot higher. And then they can lay up to 25,000 eggs in each time they lay eggs, and it only takes about 12 to 60 days for these tadpoles to develop into juveniles, which is typically about a month is when they start. And then there they become the adults. So they can live a long time. They can tolerate a lot. High temperatures up to 42 degrees centigrade, about 108 Fahrenheit, and reaching down into about 10 degrees Celsius, so about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a pretty wide range, so they can survive into those subtropical areas as well as the tropical ones. And we talked about that bufotoxin that has even caused human deaths, as well as a lot of animals and pets. Dogs are especially prone to licking or biting the toads. That bufotenin is one of those chemicals. It is classified as a Schedule 9 drug in Australia, which is the same level as things like heroin and LSD. So we talked about people using them as recreational drugs. So they're pretty severe. But the problem is the other toxins that they secrete are in much larger quantities than that bufotenin, which is why it does lead to a lot of serious illness and deaths. There are some predators. Most of them are in their native range as well. There have been some in areas like Australia that have become able to eat them. Things like opossum, kookaburra is a bird from South America.
Australia,
sorry. Frogmouths, water monitor, different rats, different birds, some species of catfish, as well as something called meat ants that are native to Australia. They're unaffected by the toxins. They're actually able to swarm and kill, especially small, like juvenile toads. But that is about as much as I have for them. As I said, they're a pretty big problem in the areas that they have been introduced.
Anything else, Alex?
That's about all I have as far as that. Like I said, it started as something like a biological control, but it's back in the time when that wasn't really the impacts of introducing species was not well considered, and it has thus led into the problem that it is now.
Terrorizing nations.
Yes.
All right. Well, I will take us back over. I decided to kind of revamp one of our older segments on the show. Long ago, last year, we did From the Vault, and it was to kind of connect the dots from what our extant species we talk about in our lessons today to some extinct species from the past. And today we're going to be talking about the Proto-Frog, known as Notobatrachus. And this is obviously an artist rendition that Alex has pulled up for us. But for the most part, their skeletal structure does resemble a modern-day frog. They are known to be a member of the stem group of Anura, so the one right before Anurans came out, with all of modern frogs more closely related to each other than to this guy. They were originally found in the Asfalto Formation in Argentina, believed to be dated back to the Middle Jurassic. It is the most complete known Jurassic frog, and they used to live within the floodplain environments of the areas that were seasonally wet and seasonally dry, with tadpoles believed to be found in the vernal pools or the ephemeral ponds. And we actually discovered a tadpole fossil of this species last year. That was the first discovery or the oldest discovery of a tadpole, dating back 160-some million years ago.
Yeah.
But real quick from the vault, nothing too major, not a whole bunch on this guy. And I'll kick it back over to Alex for our final segment of the day, our Ecology Encyclopedia that we kind of alluded to a little bit with last week's Ecology Encyclopedia.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so our Ecology Encyclopedia, I talked about them last week. I couldn't remember the specific name, but it's like what is considered like prevailing winds. It's kind of the way that wind cycles north and south within the along the globe. So this influences a lot in the way of weather patterns as well as where specific biomes are found. So you can see on the right side here, these kind of cyclical zones. They stretch, of course, the entire length of these latitudes. You can see where the equator is, and in these areas just above and below is where your tropical regions are. That what these kind of cells do is say start here at the equator, very wet, tropical, and there's a lot of moisture that moves into the atmosphere, and then it moves away from the equators to about that 30 degrees north or south. And as it does, it tends to rain a lot and it dries out. So then once it reaches that 30 degree north south, it's very dry as the air column kind of drops back down and starts moving back towards the equator. So and as it does, it picks up moisture again and then repeats the cycles. As I said, influences a lot of those habitats, why you find the tropics where you do, why they're very wet. And then as you get to those 30 degree north-south, that is where you find a lot of desert regions, is because of where that dries, and you can see the cells are kind of opposite of each other. So why it is incredibly dry about that 30 degree and 60 degree, it's pretty dry as well. But like the polar cells are kind of unique on their own just because of where they are, but also influences prevailing wind directions, why you see storms move the way they do, why in like these middle latitudes, like where we live, a lot of storms move west to east, save for some of these kind of stray ones like here in the Gulf that move west and then curl up, why you see a lot of hurricanes form and then move that way. And a lot of these were kind of found and studied during the ages of exploration. They used these to travel pretty more easily, why it was easier to travel certain directions because of those prevailing winds. I'm going to go to a different tab, kind of show, as I said, those biomes kind of go to the, like your wet and dries, why you see like here at your equator, these nice dark greens and grays, very tropical wet environments. And then as you see the cell moves toward that 30 degree, and you can see how much drier it is. Then there's some areas like here in like the United States on that Gulf Coast, just because of the way that you said that one wind kind of curls, it is fairly humid still. But as you get like here into the American West, and especially in areas like Northern Africa, like the Sahara Desert, Middle East, as well as like the Gobi Desert here in Asia, why these are so dry. And same here in Australia, why the vast majority of the outback is very dry. And you see these cells kind of recycle themselves, why this kind of here along the southern coast of South America, it's a little bit more moist, or here in that 60 degree or the middle part of like the northern hemisphere, why it tends to be very humid, get a lot of rain, like where we live here in this eastern United States, it's that pretty cool, like temperate. We get all 4 seasons, but we get a lot of precipitation. Same with here in Europe, it's fairly wet. But then as you move inland, it dries out just because you don't get that ocean, the influence from the moisture of the ocean. But as we kind of talked about last week, I just wanted to talk about a little bit why you see certain biomes in certain areas, especially certain latitudes, why that is what it is. Why areas like when we say South or Antarctica is basically a frozen desert. As you can see, the way the cycle, you have your wetter, moisture air versus your drier air. You can see this last cycle cell here. The dry air is at the pole. Drier air is at the pole when it moves away, and because it is typically so cold, even with all the snow, the actual amount of precipitation it gets is not that much compared to somewhere like near the equator, those very tropical regions. Because it is so warm, it allows for a lot of evaporation of water, making those areas very wet. Anything you would like to add to that, or is this
That was pretty doggone good there, bud.
so?
But that was our overview of another Ecology Encyclopedia on prevailing winds are from the vault on Notobatrachus, our emerging species on the Harlequin Frog, and the most one on the cane toad. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Life Complete Story. Like us on Facebook at Life the Complete Story. Find us on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, at Life the Complete Story. And if you have anything you want to add, send us an email at lifecompletestory at gmail.com. Am I missing anything, Alex?
I don't think so. I think that's got them all.
Yeah. All right, then I'll leave it to you. Take us away.
Yes, sir. Well, again, we thank you for joining us on Life, the Complete Story for another episode. And as we say at the end of every episode, keep on learning, learn something new. You'll never know what you find interesting. I've been Alex, and that has been Tyler, and we will see you in the next episode.